When my ex's mother called and asked if I still knew how to fix a fence, I should have said no. Not because I couldn't. I could fix a fence. I could fix a gate, a porch step, a leaking hose bib, a loose cabinet hinge, and half the things people ignored until they became expensive. What I could not fix was the strange feeling I got when I saw her name on my phone after 10 months of silence. Diane Whitaker, my ex-girlfriend's mother, the woman who used to hand me coffee when I came over too early to help Lauren move furniture she had bought without measuring the hallway. The woman who noticed when I was tired before Lauren did. The woman who once told me quietly while Lauren was upstairs getting ready for dinner. "You're a good man, Caleb. Don't let anyone make that feel small." I had thought about that sentence more times than I should have. My name is Caleb Reed. I was 34, a project supervisor for a small home renovation company outside in Asheville, and I had spent most of the past year learning that being easy to count on did not mean people would count you correctly. Lauren and I had dated for almost 3 years. It ended on a Sunday afternoon in her apartment with two half-packed suitcases, a cold coffee on the counter, and her saying, "I don't think this is going anywhere." I remember looking around at the shelves I had installed for her, the dining table I had assembled, the framed print I had helped her hang after she changed her mind 3 times about the height. "Going where?" I asked. She sighed like the question proved her point. "I don't know, Caleb. Somewhere. You're sweet, but everything with you feels so settled." Settled. She said it like a diagnosis. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't perform some dramatic last stand. I packed the tools I had left under her sink, carried them to my truck, and drove home with the radio off. 2 months later, I heard she had moved to Atlanta for a marketing job. 4 months later, a mutual friend told me she was seeing a guy who owned 2 motorcycles and called himself a founder because he had ordered business cards. Good for her, I guess. I meant that on better days. On worse ones, I hoped his motorcycles leaked. Diane had not called after the breakup. I understood why. Her daughter was her daughter. There were lines decent people did not cross just because affection had gotten complicated. So when my phone lit up with her name on a humid Thursday morning, I stared at it long enough for the call to almost die. Then I answered. "Mrs. Whitaker?" A pause. Then her voice, warm but careful. "Caleb, hi, I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me." That came out too quickly. She heard it. Of course she did. Diane always heard the second sentence under the first one. "I wouldn't ask if I had another good option," she said. "The storm last night knocked part of my back fence loose. The gate won't latch. I called 2 companies, but one can't come until next week, and the other quoted me something ridiculous." I looked at the schedule board in the job trailer. We had an inspection delayed until Monday and a cabinet delivery pushed back by rain. "I can take a look after work," I said. "You don't have to." "I know." Another pause, then softer. "Thank you." I told myself it was just a fence. That was all. A broken fence, a woman who needed help, and a man who knew how to use a level. Nothing dangerous, nothing complicated, nothing that should have made me change shirts twice before driving over. Diane's house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with old trees and lawns people took personally. I had been there dozens of times when Lauren and I were together. Cookouts, birthdays, Christmas Eve once when Lauren forgot to tell me her entire family dressed nicely and I showed up in jeans. Diane had saved me that night by saying, "At least one man here looks useful." I remembered that too. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I saw was the fence leaning behind the house, one section pulled loose from the post, the gate sagging like it had given up on citizenship. The second thing I saw was Diane. She stood near the back porch in a pale blue blouse, jeans, and gardening gloves, her brown hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck. She was in her late 40s, maybe 50, though she carried age the way some women carry perfume, quietly, with confidence, not asking permission to still be beautiful. I got out of the truck and immediately hated that I had noticed. "Caleb," she said, "Mrs. Whitaker." Her mouth tilted. "You can call me Diane. I think after all the shelves you installed in this house, we've earned first names." "Diane," I corrected. The name felt different in my mouth. She looked away first, toward the fence. Good. The fence was safer. I grabbed my tool bag from the truck and followed her around back. The yard smelled like wet cedar and cut grass. A wind chime moved softly near the porch. Two coffee mugs sat on the small outdoor table, though only one had been used. I tried to brace it, she said, pointing to a board she had wedged near the post. I crouched beside it. This actually helped. You don't have to sound surprised. I'm not surprised, I'm impressed. She folded her arms. That may be worse. I smiled before I could stop myself. For a second, it was too easy. That was the problem. Diane didn't make the air feel like a test. With Lauren, I had always been trying to become interesting enough, ambitious enough, spontaneous enough, less predictable, less quiet, less myself. With Diane, the quiet didn't feel like failure. It just felt like quiet. I worked for half an hour while she cleaned up branches near the garden. Every few minutes, she brought me something I didn't ask for: a towel, a bottle of water, a better extension cord. Not hovering, not fussing, just noticing. At one point, I caught her watching me tighten the hinge bolts. She looked away quickly. I pretended not to see. That was the decent thing. Or maybe the cowardly thing. Hard to tell sometimes. "You've been well?" she asked. I kept my eyes on the latch. Mostly. That means no. That means mostly. She laughed softly. I looked up. Bad idea. She was standing close enough now that I could see the faint sunlines near her eyes, the flower-colored smudge of dried paint on one wrist, the way her expression softened when she wasn't guarding it. "I heard Lauren moved," I said, because apparently I wanted to ruin my own afternoon. Diane's face changed just a little. "Yes, Atlanta." "How's she doing?" "She's Lauren," Diane said. That answer carried more than it said. I stood and wiped my hands on a rag. "That bad?" "No, not bad." She looked toward the fence. "She's chasing what she thinks she wants." "And what's that?" Diane's eyes came back to mine. "Something that never asks her to sit still long enough to know herself." The words landed quietly. Too quietly. I looked down first. The gate swung better now, but the latch still needed adjusting. I needed another 20 minutes. Maybe 30 if I worked slowly, which I was trying not to admit I wanted to do. Diane stepped onto the porch and pulled off her gloves. "Finish the fence," she said, "and I'll make lunch." I froze with one hand on the latch. Not because the sentence was improper, it wasn't. It was simple, domestic, almost innocent. But something about the way she said it, not flirtatious exactly, not bold, not careless, made the whole yard feel warmer. Like she wasn't only offering food, like she was asking me to stay a little longer. I turned toward her. She held my gaze for half a second too long. Then she looked down at the gloves in her hand. "You don't have to," she added. There it was. The line decent people draw after saying something they maybe meant too much. I should have said I had another job. I should have packed up after the latch worked and driven away with the radio on. Instead, I looked at the crooked gate, then back at her. "I can finish it," I said. Diane nodded once. And the small smile she tried to hide was the first thing that made me wonder if the fence was the only thing broken enough to bring me back there. Lunch should not have felt intimate. It was a sandwich. Turkey, tomato, sharp cheddar, toasted bread, mustard on the side because Diane remembered I didn't like it spread too thick. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Not because it was romantic, because it was remembered. Lauren used to forget small things, and then call them small, because that made forgetting them less expensive. Diane remembered them quietly without making a speech out of it. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink while she moved around behind me, opening cabinets, setting plates on the counter, pouring iced tea into 2 glasses. The house looked almost the same as it had when Lauren and I were together. Same yellow curtains over the window, same ceramic bowl near the door where everyone dropped keys. Same old radio on the shelf above the stove. But without Lauren's constant motion, the place felt different. Still, not empty, just honest. "You didn't have to make anything," I said. "I know. That's becoming your favorite answer." She smiled at the cutting board. "Maybe I learned it from someone." I dried my hands on the towel beside the sink. "From me?" You were always very good at helping without letting people make a ceremony out of it. That stopped me. Diane kept slicing tomato like she hadn't said anything dangerous. I leaned back against the counter. Lauren used to call that boring. Her knife paused, just once. Then she continued, Lauren called a lot of things boring before she understood them. There it was again. That quiet way Diane had of saying something gentle and devastating at the same time. I should have let it pass. Instead, I asked, Did she talk about me after we broke up? Diane set the knife down, not dramatically, carefully. Yes. That was all, enough to make my stomach tighten. I looked toward the back window where the repaired gate stood almost straight now. What did she say? Diane turned to face me. Caleb. That bad? No. She wiped her hands on a cloth. Not bad in the way you mean. Then how? She seemed to choose each word before letting it go. She said you were kind, reliable, safe. A small sadness moved through her expression, but she said those words like they were reasons to leave. I looked down. That hurt. Not because I hadn't suspected it, because hearing it from Diane made it impossible to pretend I had misunderstood. She wanted more, I said. Diane's voice softened. She wanted louder. That sentence went through me clean. I didn't answer. She stepped closer to the counter, close enough to reach past me for the glasses. Not touching me, not even almost, but close enough that I noticed the scent of soap on her skin and lemon from the cutting board. My mind said, Lauren's mother. My body, traitor that it was, noticed she was a woman standing close to me in a quiet kitchen. I moved aside too quickly, Diane noticed. Of course she did. A faint flush touched her face. Sorry. You didn't do anything. I know. She looked at the plates. Still. That was the strange thing between us. Neither of us had done anything wrong, but the air kept behaving like we had approached something we were not supposed to name. We ate at the small table near the window, not the dining room. That mattered. The dining room belonged to old family dinners, holidays, Lauren laughing too loudly while I helped to clear plates. The kitchen table felt different, less formal, more dangerous because it was ordinary. For a while, we talked about safe things: the storm, the neighborhood, work. She asked about the renovation company, and I told her about a house we were restoring on the east side, an old craftsman place with good bones and terrible plumbing. Her eyes lit up when I described the original woodwork. You always liked fixing what other people wanted to replace, she said. I smiled faintly. Sometimes replacement is easier. Easier isn't always better. No. We both heard the other meaning. Neither of us touched it. Halfway through lunch, her phone rang on the counter. Diane glanced at the screen. Her expression changed. Not fear, not guilt, complication. Lauren? I asked. Diane nodded. You can answer. I know. She didn't. The phone stopped, then immediately started again. This time, Diane sighed and picked it up. Hi, honey. I looked out the window, trying to give her privacy in a room too small for it. Lauren's voice came through faintly, sharp and bright, even without speaker. Did someone fix the fence? Diane's eyes flicked to me. Caleb came by. A pause. Then Lauren laughed, not warmly. Mom, seriously? Diane's face went still. What? You called Caleb? That's weird. I stared at the table. Diane lowered her voice. He knew how to fix it. Of course he did. That's his whole thing. Something in my chest tightened. Lauren continued, muffled but clear enough. He loves being needed. Just don't let him hang around and get sentimental. Diane closed her eyes. For a second, I felt like I had been put back in Lauren's apartment on the day she left, listening to her reduce 3 years of love into something too settled to keep. Then Diane said, very calmly, Lauren, that was unkind. Another pause. Oh my God, Mom. Don't make it dramatic. Diane looked at me then. And maybe it was the fact that she didn't look embarrassed for herself. She looked sorry for me. That was worse. I'll call you later, she said. She hung up before Lauren could answer. The kitchen became very quiet. I pushed my chair back. I should go. Diane stood too. Caleb, it's fine. No, it isn't. I stopped near the back door. She came closer, but not too close this time. That is not how I see you, she said. I looked at her. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. You know that, right? I wanted to say yes. I didn't. Because suddenly I wasn't sure how many years I had spent letting Lauren's version of me become the version I carried around. Useful, settled, safe, needed. Words that should have been good until she made them sound like furniture. Diane's face softened. She called you boring because she didn't know what peace looked like. I laughed once, but it almost hurt. Don't say things like that. Why? Because I might believe you. The moment changed. Just like that. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the space between us narrowed, even though neither of us moved. Diane's hand rested on the back of the kitchen chair. Mine was still on the doorframe. We were 10 feet apart and somehow much too close. She looked away first. I shouldn't have said that. No, I said. You probably should have said it a long time ago. Her eyes came back to mine. There were a dozen reasons not to keep looking at her. I knew every one of them. Lauren, history, age, the shape of gossip. The fact that Diane had once been almost family in a way that made this whole afternoon feel like stepping over an invisible line. But there was also this. For the first time in almost a year, I felt seen without being measured and found lacking. I opened the door. Outside, the yard was bright after the rain, the repaired gate catching sunlight along the new screws. Diane followed me onto the porch. I still need to stain that replacement board, I said. You don't have to. I know. She smiled faintly. There it is again. I can come back Saturday. The words came out before I gave them permission. Diane looked at the fence, then at me. That would help, she said. It was the safest answer. It was also not the whole answer. I walked to my truck, opened the door, and glanced back once. Diane was still on the porch, one hand resting against the railing, watching me leave like she wanted to say something and was too decent to let herself. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Lauren. Mom told me you came over. Please don't make this strange. I looked from the message to Diane on the porch, and for the first time since the breakup, I didn't feel like I owed Lauren the smallest version of myself. I went back Saturday. That was the first decision I could not dress up as obligation. The fence was fixed enough. The gate latched. The post held. The replacement board needed stain, yes, but that was the kind of detail a man could leave unfinished if he was trying to be wise. I was not trying very hard. Diane was in the backyard when I arrived, kneeling beside a flower bed with a basket of weeds and her hair pulled back under a wide straw hat. She looked up when she heard my truck. For half a second, her face lit before she remembered to be careful. Then she stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. You came. I said I would. I know. She looked toward the fence. People say things. Some do. That made her smile, but it faded quickly. There was tension in the yard that had not been there before. Not the soft, strange tension from the kitchen. This was sharper. Aware. Like both of us had spent the past 2 days thinking about the same moment and arriving at it from opposite sides. I grabbed the stain and brushes from the truck. Diane took off her gardening gloves. I made coffee. Is that part of the payment plan? No, the sandwich was payment. Coffee is bribery. For what? She looked at the fence, then at me. For not leaving immediately after the board dries. I should have laughed. I almost did.